Hey, folks, welcome. We are allowing the participants to join us, and we'll get started here in just a moment. As always, it's wonderful to have you on our monthly webinar series. As just a quick aside, those of you that might be new to this, our webinars were born out of a response to the pandemic, and recognizing that all of us could use just a little bit of help in figuring out some best practices and some thoughtful ways to do things. And so we're delighted to have you. All right, Brittany, we're going to get started. Thank you so much for joining us today. I am John Wilson, SOAR's Executive Director. It is a privilege and a pleasure to introduce to you our guest speaker today. But before I do so, just a few housekeeping. First of all, if you would like to see other webinars that we have done, you may go to soarnc.org/webinars, and you'll see over 50 webinars on a variety of topics, including how much time we spend on social media. And if you have a question, you feel free to raise your hand, to open up in the chat box, or to actually type in a question in the question box, and we will answer those as they are happening. I want to let you know how much I've been looking forward to this particular webinar. Years ago, I was at the LDA conference, and many of you know that I'm not just a professional that serves and works with young men and women diagnosed with learning and attention challenges. I am both. I am an adult with ADHD, and I have two children with ADHD. And so every time I went to workshops at conferences, I had a chance to sort of think about what were the issues I was dealing with. And my son is a hardcore gamer, and I want you to know that when I saw Randy's workshop in the LDA conference brochure, I made a beeline for it, and I've become a groupie. I attend every if he's speaking at a conference, I'm going to his workshop, and I learned so much. And I reference his play diet in almost every workshop that I give now. And so Dr. Randy Kulman got his PhD at Kent State. He is the executive director of Learning Works for Kids, and they are hosting executive function small group online classes using video games. He's also just written a wonderful book, which I have a copy of, the Gaming Overload Workbook. And so it is a privilege, an absolute privilege to introduce somebody that I respect so very much, Dr. Randy Kulman. Doctor, take it away.
Thank you, John. I really appreciate that introduction, and I appreciate you offering me an opportunity to speak to your group today, and to the parents and people who are coming to SOAR's webinars. So, what I'm going to be talking about is a little bit about gaming, and when do we need to be concerned about it? What are the real issues behind it? Some of the materials that I have here are pre-COVID. We live in a new world now. COVID is an entirely new universe, as most of you know. In fact, I've been writing some posts recently about how we have perhaps what we're going to be calling Generation COVID. Is the next group of is a group of kids who are growing up in this environment. We talk about Gen Xers, we talk about millennials. Are we going to be talking about Gen C or Gen COVID in terms of the impact upon them? And one of the things that may impact upon these kids is going to be the connectivity or the screen time that's been a big part of what's going on for them. So, but screen time is not new. So I had the good fortune of being in Paris a few years ago, back when you could travel. And I saw this at the Musée d'Orsay. It's called Girl in the Garden. And I thought to myself, she's texting. And then now this painting was done in 1880, okay? Now, if you look a little bit more closely, you'll see she's probably not texting, she's knitting. But when I saw it, I thought to myself, kids have been engaged and involved in whatever they're doing in their own little world for many years, and it's not new. What makes technology new is how engaging it is, and how it really kind of pulls you in so dramatically. And we'll talk a little bit about that because that is really a big part of it. So before I go too much further, I do want to say one thing. I kind of want to offer a bit of a disclaimer. I'm not a gamer myself. Okay. I've been interested in children's play for many years as an undergraduate. 45 years ago, a long time ago, I had the great opportunity to work with Dr. David Elkind, who's probably one of the leading developmental psychologists in the world, and his expertise is in play. And if you ever want to read about children's play, he's written all kinds of wonderful books about children's play, and I became very interested in children's play. And as I became a professional, I became really interested in kids' play. And then what I began to realize, especially about starting in the late 1980s and the early 1990s, is how much of children's play was devoted to screen time. And at that point, it was modest compared to how it is now. So that's sort of how I became involved with this. And so kids play has always been an important part of what I'm interested in. And the concerns about screen time are not particularly different from how they have been in the past. In the years ago, the American Academy of Pediatrics would say kids shouldn't be playing with screens. They shouldn't be doing all kinds of horrible things were said about the impact of screen time on kids. Some of them with some truth. Certainly, the lack of physical activity could be problematic. There's a small group of kids that can become more obese. For some kids, it can keep them from doing their homework. All those kinds of things. There's certainly some truth to that. But the rules have changed. During the pandemic, things changed very quickly. In fact, one of the things that happened during the pandemic is the World Health Organization actually suggested that parents allow their kids to spend more time with screens. Well, it was pretty simple. It's like if your kid's spending time with screens, they're in their home, they may be having opportunities to socialize with their friends, because unlike the old conceptualizations of video game time and screen time for kids, most of that screen time, particularly video game time, is interactive and oftentimes with their friends, not just friends that they've made online, but with their other friends. So the rules changed. I mean, not only the World Health Organization suggests that, parents kind of wanted to do that too. How could they get their work done? Well, they could let their kids spend some time on screen. How could they communicate with their families? I mean, if you wanted to know where grandma was and talk to grandma, you did it with the screen. So during that time, it became I shouldn't say that time because we're still there. That screens became a little bit more acceptable than they had been in the past. People would talk about screen time being an opportunity for managing their stress. I'm sure many of you got into watching Netflix series and things like that. And then maybe the biggest part of it is that school time, and I should say work time, became screen time. So all those things kind of connected with each other. So we actually did a little bit of studies to look at this kind of stuff. And I had a number of my students interviewing other students, interviewing some of their peers, as well as some of their family members and adults. And we asked them, since COVID started, has it changed how you're using social media and screens? And if you look at this data, it's remarkable. 84% of people said they were using screen-based media at least 2 hours more than pre-COVID. We presented this recently at the Eastern Psychological Association, and it's crazy. And if you add the 11.4%, it's like 95% of people say they were using screens more. And so I kind of wonder what's going to happen with this. Now, I would say to you that while we're seeing this here, okay, and then let me just kind of show you this slide too. That people talked about how COVID changed their use of screens. Okay, so 80% of people said it made a dramatic change in how they did that. I find myself wondering what's going to happen in the future. have two competing thoughts about this. One is, are there going to be people who now have just become so accustomed to being on screens and doing everything like this that that's how they're going to do things? Okay. So, for example, I do neuropsychological testing. As someone who does that kind of work, and we do executive functioning coaching, as someone who does that kind of work, we're doing it all on screens now. We're doing it all online. Is that how, are we going to continue to do some of it that way? I'm not sure. So there's that sense that more and more screen time is going to become part of what we do. But I'll tell you, I've also talked to a lot of teenagers who are saying something to the effect that if they never see a screen again the rest of their life, they'll be happy. Now, they don't really mean that, but basically what they're saying to me is that they've been overwhelmed by the amount of screen time they've had to spend when it comes to their schooling and everything else. So the things that once had been pleasurable about getting onto a screen are no longer pleasurable. So I had a conversation just last weekend with a 16-year-old who was saying to me, he used to come home after school right away and get into his room where his computer was and start playing some first-person shooters with his buddies from school. He says they don't do that anymore. None of them want to do it. They don't want to be on their screens any more than they have to. So I find myself wondering if that's going to change things. And if you notice that one of the things that happened during COVID is that, sure, a lot of people were stuck inside, but a lot of people started developing some new hobbies, things that they hadn't done before. I am very fortunate. I was mentioning to John earlier that we're going to talk a little bit later about a play diet, which is one of my ways of really thinking about how we handle screen time. But that one of the parts of a play diet is having vigorous physical exercise on a regular basis. I happen to live near a bike path. It's a gorgeous bike path here in southern Rhode Island. Well, no, it's not a new wonderful hobby. It's a hobby I've had, but other people have found this a new wonderful hobby, to be outdoors. And our bike path, which is right near us, is like so crowded now. Sometimes I used to feel like it was my own bike path a year and a half ago. I would go out there and I'd see a few people. Now it's packed full of people, which is great. But I almost feel as if part of that was that people had so much time with screens that they decided that they needed to do something else. And I'm wondering how many people are going to do that. How many people are going to be more into baking breads or growing their own food or other kinds of hobbies that are not necessarily based upon the screen. Although many hobbies these days use screens to help you. Okay, when I cook, I don't use a cookbook anymore. I use my iPad.
Randy, I'll tell you that that one of the things that we saw this last summer, we did not program, but our vendors indicated that it was the busiest year that they had ever had in terms of bike rentals, in terms of rafting, and in terms of people being outside.
Yeah. And I almost feel like that there's a little bit of an anti-screen like approach because of that. It's kind of like we had too much of this indoor stuff. We had too much of sitting in front of screens. We want to do these other things. And hopefully what's going to happen is people are going to start to develop some new hobbies and habits because of that. They're going to say, this is something I really love to do. And they're going to be able to get their kids to do it. So what we're looking at here is this is prior to COVID. This is a 2015 study from Common Sense Media. And if anybody really wants to learn more about this stuff, Common Sense Media is a fantastic place for going to look for information about people's use of screens, as well as what's good for kids. What are some of the activities that kids can do with screens that are really helpful? So what's remarkable about this is that we see how teenagers were spending about 9 hours per day with screen time. Okay. And tweens were spending about 6 hours a day. And most of this, almost all of this is recreational screen time. So what are the kids doing? Okay. Well, so this gives you a little bit of an idea of what they're doing. And they are spending time communicating with their peers, particularly if you're a teenager. So you can see the communication piece is a big part of that. Television is a huge part. Interestingly, since this study was done in 2015, the amount of time watching television on a TV has been reduced by about 50%. They're still watching TV, just not on regular television sets, either on their phones or they're watching streaming. They're doing streaming. They're getting that kind of TV content in a different way. But you can see how much of this is going on. So it's a dramatic change in terms of that. Another area where there's a big change, is in terms of where it's happening. Kids are now doing stuff on their phone. Okay, and mobile technology is crazy. So did you realize that about 75% of people, and if I could get everybody to raise their hands, I would ask them to do this. I would ask them, how many of you have your cell phone within arm's reach? So the data suggests that 75% of people, me too, mine's right here in front of me, John, about 75% of people have their cell phones within arm reach at all times. Okay, so that's amazing. Okay, and if you're a teenager, it's probably higher than that. In fact, it's interesting. There was a ruling done from the Supreme Court about 3 or 4 years ago, and Chief Justice John Roberts said it was about whether cell phone had to privacy around somebody's cell phone, and basically what the Chief Justice said was that if an alien came down to Earth, they would think that these cell phones are parts of people's bodies. And
Randy, I've my dear friend Dr. Roy Sanders, who has done some workshops with me, mentioned that for some kids and probably some adults, the cell phone has become an appendage, and to take away the consequence of the cell phone, it is like you've removed a part of their being.
Absolutely. And it's painful. I'm sure that you have parents out there who have taken their phone away from their teenagers, and the emotional recoil from that has been probably worse than anything they've seen. In fact, I worked with a kid recently who got hospitalized after her parents took the phone away because she was so out of control. So it's pretty remarkable. Okay, and that's a concern.
Somebody just wrote in the chat bar that they heard our pinky bone is evolving because of the cell phone.
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me. It's really pretty remarkable thing. So let's see. I got to see if I can get this to click for me. Okay, so here's the deal, though. It's not just the kids. So all of you adults who are here, if you have a mirror, take a look at it. And you're going to see yourself, okay? The Nielsen study here, this was more recent. Adults are spending 11 hours a day with some type of media. Now, some of this is listening to the radio, which kids don't do as much as adults do, but they'll stream other kinds of stuff. But nonetheless, and most of this is not. Most of this is not work time. I think the data is that the work time here. Let me see if I have that actually here. Yeah, I don't have it in my notes, but I think the work time is really about 2 hours a day. This is prior to COVID, obviously. So what we see, though, is just how remarkable it is in terms of adults doing this. And when adults want to set limits on kids, they really need to look at what they're doing themselves.
It's interesting, Randy. I think about that, and when I'm trying to decompress at night, I watch a little bit of TV, but I don't just watch TV. I'm also playing some game on my my tablet, and then I'll switch from the game and I'll look over at the phone and see if I've gotten any notifications on Facebook or in Instagram, and so it's like I'm not content to just embrace one thing. I've got 3 different things going, and it drives my wife bananas.
Well, I don't think you're alone in doing
driving my wife bananas. You're right.
Well, yeah. Maybe not. I don't know, but you maybe no. Well, no, you might be the only one who's driving her bananas. Maybe you drive other people bananas too.
Okay.
I don't know. I'd have to know the people that you're working with over there. But you're right. I mean, this is what we do, and now it would be easy to say, Well, John, you said that were diagnosed with ADHD, and people with ADHD really need a lot of things to kind of keep their mind going. It's not just you, okay, and it's not just ADHD. This is sort of the world that we're growing up in, or we're living in right now. Is that it's just that we're looking for so much stimulation, and that's part of why kids love these games and technologies. It's because they're so stimulating. In fact, I would actually argue that one of the things that we have observed happening over the past 10, 15 years is the incredible increase in people getting involved in mindfulness training, yoga, meditation, almost in some ways to counteract this kind of stuff, this need to have so much stimulation, to be able to quiet our minds a little bit, to be able to be okay with that. It's really difficult. And you know what? I'm going to raise my hand. I'm guilty too. I sometimes do this, and this is a horrible thing to do. I love watching sports. I'll put on some sports on TV. I'll be eating lunch a little bit away from our TV. I'll have my iPad there, okay? And what happens is, I got my iPad in case there's a commercial. I'm really looking at that. But I actually I'm not mindful of what I'm eating. So it takes away from something in that respect. I mean, it's one thing to be engaged in a screen. It's another thing when a screen's taking away from other kinds of activities or things that are important in your life. I happen to be a really good cook. I love to cook. I love to eat. I'll make the sandwich that, you'd die for it at a sandwich shop, and I've eaten it before I know it, because what have I been doing? I've been kind of have my attention being focused on two different screens. So it's a problem. And, I recognize it. Sometimes I overcome it. Other times I don't. And for the most part, the kids don't feel a great need to necessarily do that. So anyway, adults are doing a lot of stuff with their screens. And if we're going to be talking to our kids about it, we need to kind of look in the mirror, is what it amounts to. So let's take a look at this.
It's so nice to all be sitting down together. You can tell me something they did today.
I drew a horsey.
Good for you, son.
I started smoking.
I love you too, sweetheart.
I'm selling bongs out of our minivan.
I got a tramp stamp.
I'm getting implants.
I'm dating your brother.
Uh-huh.
I'm cooking meth in the basement.
Great idea, kiddo. That's why you're so popular at school.
So if any of you are interested, whoops, I don't show it. Will Ferrell made a number of videos for Common Sense Media. I was mentioning the Common Sense Media studies before. He's made a number of videos for them. They're hilarious. And they point out some of the concerns that we have with screen time, and particularly with adults doing some of this kind of stuff as well. So I have this slide here because I wanted to at least touch on specifically screen time in kids with ADHD. I'm not really focused on that today. But so this screen basically shows more. It's older research. I think most of this research was done. Most of this research was done prior to maybe 2013. So yeah, that's the Masaryk study. They were looking at kids both with ADHD and autism spectrum disorder. But lots of these studies kind of have show that too much video game time for kids with ADHD can be problematic, particularly in terms of their attention problems. One of the things that's a real struggle, one of the reasons I got so interested in this is because many kids with ADHD, screen time is one of the few places that they very readily stay very focused, and that makes them feel good. We see some data that suggests that when kids with ADHD are playing video games, that there are increases in the dopamine in their brain, and that feels good. It's the reward center of the brain. So there are these kinds of things that we see that are more apt to happen with kids with ADHD, and we know that in general, kids with ADHD don't necessarily have problems paying attention. They have problems shifting attention or paying attention to something they don't want to pay attention to. So those big concerns about transitions. How do you get my kid who has ADHD to stop playing video games. I ask anytime I've done any kind of webinars, and I've done a series of webinars for Attitude Magazine, for example. That's the biggest question I get is, how do you do that? And I give some suggestions, but none of them are perfect because it's really difficult. This is it because the kids feel really good. They're really focused. They really their brains feel good because they can be attentive and focused to this in a way that oftentimes they're not in other areas. So I want to talk a little bit about internet gaming disorder. So this is a new disorder in the DSM-5. Recently came out in 2014. And a lot of people are questioning whether there really is such a thing as internet gaming disorder. There's been a lot of research on this. But the general concept is looking at this as an addiction. And so the criteria for people who have internet gaming disorder really are the criteria that we use for addiction issues in general. Now, internet gaming disorder is probably a much larger concern in countries outside the US. In particular, some of the countries in Southeastern Asia have a much larger concern about this. There are not a lot of real experts on this and not a lot of people who are really good at treating this as well. And from all the reading that I've done, it's probably best for us to look at this just like we look at other things, ADHD, depression, looking at these things along a continuum. There are people who truly are addicted to video games, to the internet, and it's really interfering with their life. And you can see some of the criteria here. They're doing it even though it's causing them great distress. They might have lost their job. Their family might have given up on them. They can't control themselves. It really has a highly negative impact upon them. And there are those people. And then there are people all the way who never play any video games, but it's all along a continuum. And so what I want to do is kind of show you some of the issues around the continuum, because I think it's really easy to take a look at a kid and say, oh, this kid is addicted to video games or addicted to the internet. And maybe that's not quite the case. So one of the ways to look at this is to look at there being different types of people who are really engaged and really involved in video games. One of the better studies that was done identified problem gamers, engaged gamers, passionate gamers. This is a study done by Charlotte Thorson, and so this is what they did: is they identified these different types of gamers and looked at to see, did they meet the criteria for internet gaming disorder, or are they below that? So what the data would suggest, anywhere from about 3 to 8% of people might qualify as displaying signs of an internet gaming disorder. On the other hand, you'll find some researchers who say it's like 1 or 2%, and you'll find some people who say that's 45% of the population, which seems a little bit extreme to me. So let's look a little bit at what we mean by these different types of gamers. So problem gamers. This is about 7% of the population, and these are gamers who essentially acknowledge that it's getting it's interfering a little bit in what's going on in their life.
Randy, when we took a look at this and we had a conversation with our son, what we talked about in particular was what we called the digital monster. And the digital monster was, when he was asked to stop, it's time to transition to something else. And if he could control that anger, and if he could remove himself from the activity onto what the next thing was, we were okay. But when the digital monster made an appearance, and he would just become a wrecking ball because he was asked to stop, that's when we sat down and said, okay, this is a problem.
So is the digital monster come in different forms, John? The digital is any time the technology there the digital monster, or sometimes it kind of blows up into a monster? I'm trying to understand it.
It is when he was younger. Let's say he was doing a marathon session with Minecraft, and he was asked to transition away from that, and then in that moment he would pitch a fit and become aggressive and act like and that was what we utilized as a way to say, do you see the problem here?
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and if you can get a child to sort of be introspective and step back and recognize that actually one of the first steps that you want to take to help kids to change this. Well, I mean, certainly when we talk about some of the methods of change, one of the things is sort of that pre-contemplation, contemplation sort of place where you're starting to think about it and you're starting to look at it and you're starting to step back from it. So for problem gamers, it's a little harder. Okay, these are people who may not be addicted, but it's still interfering with what's going on. It's causing some distress. It's causing some conflicts at home. It's causing homework to not get done. It's getting in the way. And one of the things with problem gamers, what they found out in this study is that they may have some difficulties with their physical health. The next piece is engaged gamers, and so these are people who don't have the signs of withdrawal. They sometimes take it too far. They're the kid who maybe is playing till 11:30 at night when they really should be going to bed at 10 o'clock at night. And it impacts some of their activities, but they're really into it. They're really enjoying it. And I guess I would say to you that we are concerned about this when it comes to gaming, but sometimes perhaps this kind of person that's really engaged we might see it in something else. We might see it the kid who's super involved in their theater group, and that's all they want to do is be involved with their theater friends and do that, or a kid who's into sports and is like wants to play basketball 6 or 7 hours a day, and they get home from they after school they go play basketball for hours. They come home from school, they come home from playing basketball, they eat dinner, and they're too tired to do their homework. So there's that kind of engagement, but some of that can be really positive. Okay, it can build their self-esteem. It can help them connect with other people as well, but it can get in the way of some other things. But for people who are the engaged gamers, that we tend to see them having less symptoms of the kind of addiction, if you will. And then this is the other form of gamers, if you will. These are the passionate gamers, obsessed gamers. They're really into gaming, and they identify themselves as gamers. Their friends are gamers. These are kids who know all about the newest games. They're the ones who, if you want to talk about a game and learn about it, that's great. Their social recreational activities revolve around games. It fits with who they are. We actually hire some of these kinds of folks for our Learning Works for Kids Live program. So our teachers in our Learning Works for Live program, where we teach kids executive functioning skills, are people who really know games well, but feel like they've learned so much from their gameplay that they want to communicate that to others. So we teach them about how games use executive functions. They already know this, but we kind of put it into our format, and they are excited about games. They're excited about using games as a tool for teaching other kids. They're excited about finding out about a new game, or they get excited about something related to the game. So, for example, I've met lots of kids who love Minecraft, who are what I would call passionate gamers, but what they've learned is they've learned to code. They have learned about other games. They've learned computer skills. They're going to use those skills in their life. I hope they are, because they're going to have jobs. They're going to be really facile with that kind of thing, and so they're not addicted. But this is a passion. This is a love of theirs. Would they be a little bit healthier maybe if they got out of their room sometime and went outside? Well, most of these kids do, but they have a real passion about games. And if you've got a kid like that, I think that what you want to do is you want to try to think about what I would call the zone of proximal development. How do you take that and expand it to something else? How do you expand that to coding? How do you expand that to website design? How do you expand this to becoming a videographer or a video editor? How do you take that interest in technology? How do you take that interest in technology maybe to help them become some kind of engineer? How do you use that? Because I think we can help kids who have these interests kind of pursue other things.
So, Randy, I wanted this is so perfect that you're segueing to play diet, because we had a young man, and again, I relayed that this was all so significant to me in my home. We had a young man who was bordering on obsessive. He was, the digital monster would come out. he would sneak game time, and it was your play diet. It was this, what you're about to talk to, that helped us turn him from that person that was kind of going towards the path to being, addicted, to being a passionate gamer. And that allowed us to lean into it a little bit, because eventually, we actually took him to some national conferences where he would play in national tournaments, because he could then meet some of these people he'd been playing online with. But we were also doing other things. So I'm so delighted to have you talk about the play diet, because it is the thing that moved us from going down one path to one that is, it's a healthy obsession that he has, and he loves it and he leans into it, but he's also doing other things. So take it away.
So you reminded me of something else. I want to diverge for 1 minute here before I get to play diet. So some kids, but very few kids who are passionate, engaged gamers can become professional gamers. It's rare. Right now, it is more difficult to become a professional gamer and make a good income than it is to become a professional football player. So I think it's about 1 out of every 10,000 high school athletes can become a professional football player. So it's rare. However, for those of you who follow this, digital sports or esports are becoming incredibly popular. In fact, I think they believe that in 2022, there's going to be more spectators of esports than of other professional sports in the world. With that comes all kinds of jobs that are not necessarily those of being a professional gamer, but of running professional leagues, of being managers, of being the physical therapists. They have these teams have therapists, being in marketing, all those kinds of things. That it's a huge area of jobs. There's an organization amongst colleges. Over 200 colleges now have college gaming teams, just like they have a basketball team, like the NCAA tournament. They have college teams. It's called the NACE, National Association of some Collegiate. I don't know what the E stands for, but it's NACE. So anyway, there's going to be lots of jobs out there for these kids. Okay.
The other thing they're finding, Randy, is that these kids that are professional gamers, they peak at like 15.
Yeah, a little bit older, but the guy who won the Fortnite, he was 16. Muga.
Right,
Okay.
and then by the time he turned 17, 18, he was an old man, and he had these 13, 14-year-olds that were coming for his title.
Right. Yeah, so they peak early. You're exactly right. Yeah. But what they do is they make a living by making YouTube videos, by having Twitch channels,
becoming a coach,
becoming a coach, all those kinds of things. So so my point about this is that, whereas it would be easy 20 years ago for parents to say it's a waste of your time, it may be a waste of your time if your sole goal is to be a professional gamer, because it's just so difficult to do. But if your goal is to make something in the world of technology, gaming, this kind of the broader field. And so that's why I'm saying start with that and help the kids to broaden out from that. And that really does fit with the play diet, which is, having a balance. So when I talk about a play diet, I don't talk about a media diet. Basically, I'm saying that I've always been interested in play. And what I realized is that at some point 25 years ago, when the overwhelming majority of people said video games are a total waste of time, I said, wait a minute, kids are playing. And we know that play equals learning. When we talk about kids, that's how they learn, especially younger kids, but older kids as well. Play equals learning. So digital play, playing video games, is another form of play. 30 years ago, most of that play was sitting in front of a screen by themselves playing a game. That's not the case anymore. It's not at all. And so that we want to be accepting of digital play, but at the same time, we have to say, listen, that's just one part of your life. It's kind of like a meal. If the only thing you eat is fruit is really good for you. Eat fruit all day and that's the only thing you eat. Well, you're going to spend the other half of the day in the bathroom. Okay, so you really need a balance of these kinds of things. And so this is how we came up with this idea. And for me, the most important types of play is not digital play, it's active play and social play. That the healthy part of play is to be outdoors, to be exercising, to be physically active. Social play, involvement with other people, involvement with family, talking. I used to say face to face, but it's not so much that now. And so some of this is tricky. And play diets were really tricky prior to COVID, and they're even trickier now. Okay, and so it's become increasingly difficult. And part of the reason it's so difficult is because digital play itself is so immersive and so engaging, and to I'll use the word addictive. I don't know that we have to really talk about it as an addiction, but it really pulls people in so much, and I think that's a really important part. So how do you do some of this kind of stuff? So I would say there's a few things that you need to do. Is parents need to be really active in this. They have to make other play more attractive. They have to put money and time into it. They have to model this. I mean, the best way to get kids to be involved in other kinds of activities and play is to model it at home, to go out for hikes as a family, to have hobbies such as reading or cooking or gardening or whatever you like to do. Another way that I've been kind of pushing for a balanced play diet is to think about something I call whole play. As I kind of mentioned earlier, so when I love to cook, it's a great hobby. Okay, you guys can probably see I have lots of books here, but I have a giant shelf of cookbooks. I rarely open them now because I do most of my cooking based upon recipes that I find on screens. Okay, so that's to me is whole play. I've got a screen. I'm using the screen to help me. A kid who goes out for a hike and takes pictures of something like that is great. Doing I mentioned here doing a yoga video, finding ways of using screens to have conversations with your friends. There's lots of ways that we can use screens. I mean, one of the best methods for whole play in the past was when kids were playing Pokemon Go. When they would go places and they would travel, they would walk, they would hike, they would do things like that. So there's lots of kinds of ways that we can use technology to kind of help with that. But the key thing is also to make sure that other things happen and to expect it. Parents need to kind of create some expectations for that. So what I did is I pulled out a couple of things out of my Gaming Overload workbook. Now, the Gaming Overload workbook is a book that is designed for teenagers to read, and it's written for teenagers. And the voice that I take when I write it is to say to them, hey, listen, you know what? You like video games? Terrific. You like doing stuff on screen? That's great. There's other things that are important in life too. And we want you to kind of at least think about that. And so we kind of, the way the book is written is so that when kids read the book, they don't feel as if they're being castigated for the fact that they like playing video games or that they like doing this kind of stuff. Instead, we say to them, take a look at it. And not only look at your stuff, we ask them to look at their parents. We ask them to look at the things that are good about their involvement with screens and gameplay. And then I certainly work with them in the book. I have we have different activities. There's activities about how to manage your screen time. There's also activities about how to develop your own healthy play diet. And so the focus of it is really just to get the kids to want to partner with a parent or with a clinician who might work with them. Interestingly, the most recent studies that Common Sense Media has done suggests that kids themselves, the teenagers, more than, I think it's 55% is the most recent data, kind of recognize and say that they spend too much time with their screens. This is pre-COVID, by the way. Okay. I know that's more than that, saying that now. Just maybe I shouldn't say I know that, but anecdotally, I'm sure that that's the case. Here's another activity we did with this, and this is in the Gaming Overload workbook. It's really just to get the kids to kind of look at what they're doing. We're trying to get them to see how many minutes a day are they involved in each of these kinds of things, and looking at the difference between school days and non-school days, and then trying to get the kids to then the follow-up to this is asking them about other activities. How much time are you spending doing sports or doing physical activities and doing those kinds of things? I'm trying to gradually lead them to thinking about this sort of healthy play diet, if you will. So let me see if I've got anything more here. So a couple of other just quick ideas in terms of kind of monitoring and working on screen time is that I think it's really important for us to kind of model good screen time, to know what your kids are doing. It's much harder when the kids are teenagers. Understand why they love technology. Find and help and help encourage them to be involved in good screen time if you can. The other thing is to stick to your values. So I like to tell a story about when my son now, who is 27, he was 14 years old. We were down in our basement where I have a little workout room. So I was working hours during the winter, and there's a TV down there. He wanted to play one of the early Call of Duty games. And he said to me, Dad, you're not gonna like this. So turn your head, because the TV's right sort of 15 feet in front of me, and I'm working out. And sure enough, I don't like it at all. It's really violent. It's really something that I didn't like. And up until then, he was, I think, 15 at the time. Up until then, I hadn't let him have that kind of Call of Duty game in the house. He was 12, 13 years old, asking me, can I get this game? Can I get this game? And the answer was always no. I said, I don't like those violent games. I don't think those are good for kids. I don't think it's going to make you go shoot people. He said, I'm not going to go get a gun, shoot people. Well, no, it's not going to make you do that, but it might desensitize you. I don't really like that. And he said, well, I could go play at my friend's house. And sure enough, he would. No, it's fine. What was I going to do? He goes to his friend's house, and he's a good kid, good family, happy to do that. But I think it's important to stick to your values about some of these kinds of things. And everybody's got a different set of values around this stuff. We talked before about modeling. This is really what I think parents need to do. It's the first thing to do. And by the way, the earlier you start, the easier this is. If we're talking about trying to do this with teenagers now, it's really hard. Real quickly, what do we try to do at Learning Works for Kids with this is, well, we try to leverage what kids are doing with games and help them learn something from it. So it's a pretty simple strategy. We don't think that playing video games themselves is going to improve executive functioning skills, is going to improve problem-solving skills, although there's some data to support that it can do that to some degree. But the amount it would help is really minimal. But we do think that when you get kids to identify skills they're using in games, and the games kids like, by the way, are not simple shoot 'em games. Those shoot 'em up games are far more than that. If you ever watch a kid play those games, they're using skills such as planning. They're having to be flexible. They have to organize their stuff. They have to remember things from the past. They have to use self-control. They have to use a variety of what we call executive functioning skills. So we try to help kids when they're playing games, when we play with them, to identify the skills they're using. We want them to reflect on those skills, which is really what we call metacognition. And we know that kids, in order to be able to learn, really need to step back, reflect, and think about what they're doing, whether that's in the game or the real world. And most importantly, we want to help kids to generalize those skills, make game-based learning into real-world skills. So we want to connect it to those real-world situations. So we kind of give kids homework, we give parents things to do. We help the kids to kind of see how the skills that they're using in the games can be skills that they can use in the real world. This is just a snapshot of my most recent book, and so I think it's like I said, there's a lot of exercise. It's a great tool for getting kids to talk with each other and talk with you. So that's what I've got. I wanted to make sure that I got done on time. I'm sorry if I rushed through those last few slides, but I wanted to make sure. If you want to contact us, you can. Here's all of our contact information. Our Learning Works for Kids website has lots more about play diets and all these kinds of things as well. So that's what I got, John.
Well, thanks. I got bumped off. Brittany, would you read the chats and see if there's information that people wanted or had questions for Randy?
Yeah, absolutely. We had a few questions come in since the start. So let me just start at the top if that's okay. One was recreational screen time. We have 6 hours a day of school. How did that fit in? They do online school.
So what is the question? What do we mean by recreational screen
Yeah,
time? How much do we?
how does that fit in when they are already doing 6 hours of online school?
So, I mean, I think that we have to really sort of separate that. That it's there were concerns about screens, and actually, it's interesting. Back in the 1960s, there were major concerns about kids watching TV and it impacting their vision. There was this sort of panic about it, and then the data was that really wasn't a problem. However, people are saying more recently there's been some studies, suggesting that screen time can have can cause some problems with vision. People spending so much time with screens. Some people are getting like the glasses, for that help protect your eyes from screens. So but I think it's important to separate the school time from screen time. That if kids, just because the kids are having to do other stuff on screens for school doesn't mean that they can't have some recreational time with their friends. And some of these kids, that's how they're going to see their friends. That's how they're going to communicate with their friends these days. I mean, that's how they talk to each other. In fact, it's so powerful and it's so common. I don't know if anybody saw this, but Microsoft is attempting to purchase a tool called Discord. So if your kids play Minecraft, invariably they're talking to each other. They have Discord running at the same time. It's a chat. It's an audio chat where they're speaking to each other. Microsoft is negotiating to buy Discord for $10 billion. That's how common this is. That they're trying to reach into that to see that. So that's I would really kind of separate those two things, though.
Okay, great. Thank you. We also had a question. It was when you were talking about, John Wilson gave the example of the monster when his son is told to transfer. And she said, does the same apply when they can't get to the screen versus getting him off? I'm not sure that's all the question was. If that person wants to give any more, I can.
So that's a really interesting question. And I think that one of the ways to look at that is in the power of screens to pull people in. So if you think about how powerful that screen is to sort of kind of pull a kid, or for that matter, an adult, to it, we have to look at it not so much from the kid perspective as something going on with them, but what is it about these screens that are so powerful? So one of the ways to look at this is an author by the name of Adam Alter. He's a psychologist. He wrote a book called Irresistible. And essentially what he talks about is how tech companies are so smart. They are really, in many ways, he blames them for keeping people on screens. And the way that happens is a bunch of ways that psychologists know how to do this. So if one thing is variable feedback. So, if you go to a casino and you go to a slot machine, you don't win every time. And you don't win every 10th time. You win, and after the 10th time, now you might win the next time. You might take 20 more times to do this. It's variable feedback. That is the most addictive type of feedback. So for example, kids who are doing social media, they put something up. They wait to see, does somebody respond? They play a game. Can they win? So there's variable feedback that goes on. The portability, the fact that their screens are every place, that they can walk around with their phones, are noteworthy. The fact that when you're playing on screens, there are no cues to stop. If those of you who watch Netflix know that after you watch one show, 5 seconds later, the next one's coming up. There's no ways to stop that. Most video games, the same thing. There's no stopping cues. That sandbox games like Minecraft, you could play forever. Things like unresolved cliffhangers, or that with movies and things like that, and things on TV. But that also happens in terms of games and going to different levels, so that the technology itself brings the kids in there. So I would say to you that yes, what John is saying and what this mom is saying is the same thing. It's like, it's the monster is sort of there in on both places, that the angst and the need to get there isn't, but to understand that part of that is the power of these technologies to pull people in. Very powerful.
Okay, great. Another person shared that their children have always begged for unlimited screen time. During COVID, they did cave as the parent. And so the question is, can kids ever learn to self-moderate screen usage? They never did form COVID hobbies.
Randy, let me just tackle that for a second, because we were able to do that, and as I mentioned, we did it using the play diet, and when I brought the play diet home, my son looked at it, and a few minutes later he said, "Dad, 3 of the 4 of these things can be done on the computer," but what we did as a family that was so critical was the physical play. We made sure that our kids were invested and involved in some type of physical play every day, and we found ways to recreate on weekends with the physical play, and that made all the difference.
Yeah, and John, to kind of expand upon that a little bit, I would say 2 things. One is that you create a set of expectations that your family is going to do other things, that there will be other things. You model it, you do it, and you expect it. And one of the ways to make unlimited screen time not unlimited is just to say every day we go for a walk after dinner, or every day we exercise every day we do this. If you take 3 or 4 hours a day and you're doing other things, and it doesn't have to be 3 or 4 hours because there's only so much recreational time that people might have, but each hour that you have like that is 1 less hour of screen time. You can use the same. I use the same analogy, if you will, for kids who have real significant behavioral issues at home with their parents. If their parents they can't stand it, 10 hours a day the kid's doing stuff. I said, well, how about if we can get 1 or 2 hours a day where they're doing something productive that they like? Maybe they play Legos for an hour. Okay, now all of a sudden you get 9 hours of problems a day. So let's cut it down to 8 hours. Let's find something else that they can do. So having those expectations, making those things happen, and sometimes it really requires a lot of effort. So if I would say to you, for example, one of the things, and I think this is maybe one of the reasons that SOAR is successful for kids with ADHD, is you do these active things. I had a conversation earlier with parents. I say, and I've written about this, I think that a lot of kids with ADHD should be involved in doing dangerous activities. People look at me like, that sounds like a terrible thing, but it's not. What I'm saying is they need legitimate legal risks. So if that means skateboarding or I mean, what percentage of the kids who are the best snowboarders in the world have ADHD? It's not 5%. I can tell you that. It's a lot higher than that.
It's interesting. We put a hatchet in kids' hands and teach them how to throw a tomahawk at a target, and they're never more focused than when they've got that tomahawk in their hand and they're trying to hit that target.
Right.
It's kind of cool.
Yeah, dangerous activities are good. So, but that sometimes takes effort. Okay, that might mean you have to bring them over to the skateboard park. That's 20 minutes away. Okay, that might mean you got to bring them skiing someplace. That might mean you need to get them a surfboard. That might mean you got to get them together and go to a mountain to climb. I mean, it's more effort. It's more effort, and so parents, need to take a look at that. And I'm talking about for the kids with ADHD, but even just in general for a play diet these days, these technologies are so immersive. They're so engaging. You've got to make things a little bit more interesting. You've got to figure out how to do that.
Wonderful. The next question that came in earlier was, how do we get the kid to feel like they have some control over the regulations parents put in place?
Wow, that's an excellent question. Okay, and I think that that partnering with the kids, that getting kids to be willing to think about this and work on this is important. So some of that's the age of the kids. I mean, I would tell you that that's part of why I wrote this book, is because I wanted the kids to have a sense that, okay, this is okay, but let's get you to think about this too. Let's get them to do this, so it's not just an imposition on the kids. That is not always easy. With younger kids, I think parents just need to set rules and expectations and make that kind of stuff happen. With teenagers, when they have more autonomy, and it's really also hard because most of the kids are going to have have phones. I mean, I don't know if you know how many kids have phones, but I'm just looking at some of the data here. 96% of Americans own a cell phone. Okay, 84% of teens own a smartphone, and I think the majority of kids now in the U.S. have their cell phones by the age of 12. Okay, wild.
I'll take a stab at answering that, and part of it is when you are it's a process, and it begins with you saying these are the things that happen that I don't want to have happen, whether it's when I ask you when I give you a 5-minute warning, and then at the end of that 5 minutes you don't comply and I have to come get you, that's a problem. And so if you create the expectation of what it is that you really want, and then you use that to then evaluate how well are the strategies working, and then now you can have a conversation. Hey, remember this was the issue that we talked about, and then I went up and I asked you to come downstairs, and you didn't, and then you yelled at me. Well, you had agreed not to do that, so now we have to find a strategy that is going to work that will allow you to be successful. And that's how you then can create buy-in, because it's then either we work together to find a strategy, or my strategy is, the smite button, and, I'll turn off the internet.
Mm-hmm.
And so, so if you want to get them engaged with you, then talking about outcomes and being able to point out what is and is not happening, and then help them understand that they have some ownership of that is the way you can get that buy-in.
Yeah, John, I think it's an excellent point. Getting the kids to have some ownership of these kinds of things becomes really important. If you're gonna get them to change, and I think one other thing I would point out is going back to what I was saying before about the power of these technologies to pull people in, is that it's pretty easy to get kids to sit on the same side of the fence with you on that topic. In other words, so that you're not blaming them. You're saying this technology is stronger than you, and it's stronger than me sometimes. Let's take a look at what we can do to handle that. And I think that's one of the things that we frequently don't do. I mean, these technologies aren't going away. Okay, it's just going to become they're going to become even more powerful, and at some point probably we will have those technologies embedded in our beings, in our physical beings. But I think that's a place where you can join with the kids, and that kids can kind of, because if you're not blaming them, they're more apt to kind of say, sometimes I wish I could just stop this. I mean, a lot of kids wish they could stop some of the social media stuff that they're doing. They really,
there was a research study that I referenced in a previous webinar that talked about kids who were using social media and screen time less were actually happier. We've had this we've had this question come up several times, Randy, and I resonate because I asked you the same question and you did not give me a definitive answer, and that's because there isn't one. But the question is, what is an appropriate amount of time for a 13, 14, 15-year-old to be on the computer? And I think what you told me at the time was, hey, it really depends on other things that are going on. It depends on so I'll let you kind of take a stab at that question because it's being asked.
Okay. So there's a pre-COVID, a during COVID, and a post-COVID answer to that. How's that? Okay. That's my way to squirm out of giving you a really good answer. Okay. Because I also think that some of this has to do with family values and things like that. But what I was really saying to you back then, John, was what I would say to you right now is this child getting outdoors, exercising, being active. Are they doing social things? Are they involved in some other activities? Are they in karate or doing things? Are they getting their schoolwork done? Okay. I mean, there are kids who are very efficient, get all those things done. I am in no way do I feel as if a kid needs to be restricted to, and at that age, to an hour a day, because there's also how they communicate with each other. During COVID, it's how we all communicate with each other. And I think in some ways, kids taught us a lesson that, you can have real relationships and real communication by FaceTiming your friends. You really can. You can maintain things. Is it the best way to do it? No. All of us miss kind of, all of us adults who want to go out with their friends and see their friends to go out for dinner and do that. We miss that. That's better. But I would say that you start from that perspective of, are they doing those other kinds of things? If you look at this from the perspective of what is happening with kids, we looked at 9 hours a day of screen time, and that's not all sitting in front of a computer, by the way. A lot of that's music and other things, and 6 hours a day for tweens. I would say if you think about a couple of hours a day of recreational screen time, that's probably a pretty modest and relatively healthy amount. There is some pretty good data. Andrew Shabilsky and his peers have done a whole bunch of large-scale studies. And what they found is that kids who average 3 or more hours a day, and some of these kids, when I say 3 or more hours a day, some of these kids are 12 or 15 hours a day, have some mental health issues and some adjustment issues. Below 3 hours a day, not a whole lot. Interestingly, the same study suggested that kids who spend who spend no time at all with screens have more psychological issues.
Interesting.
Okay? Well, makes sense to me. How do kids communicate? How do they interact with each other? How do they become part of a social group? Well, it's
the new neighborhood. And for some of our kids, as we know, the social awkwardness, it has opened up a world where they could actually have relationships when previously they may have been isolates. And so, my son has become very social, but there for a while, the closest friendships he had were the Brawlhalla folks that he was playing online with, and that meant something. And then when he got a chance to meet them and those relationships were able to kind of grow, was really very special. Well, here I'll share the ones that I've seen. Where can folks find your book?
Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and it's any place. It's part of a big series done by New Harbinger Press. They have a lot of really good books for teenagers. So if I'm pitching this, but I'm also telling you that there's books on ADHD for teenagers. There's books on anxiety and stress related things. There's a lot of really good workbooks for teenagers to use that are open to the kids. In other words, the kids open the book and they'll look at it. They'll find some things that are useful for them.
Someone wrote, do you have some advice about how to help my 19-year-old brother who believes that he could be a professional gamer and refuses to work otherwise? You touched on that a little bit.
Yeah.
I would say, hey, you know what? Go to a tournament, see how you do. And if you don't place in the money, you then figure out another way to support that community.
Right, and look into some of the esports. If you want to be involved in that field, look into some of the esports leagues. If they go to that website that I was telling you about, the NACE website, that's go to college to be a gamer. Be on a college gaming team. Go to college. Be on a college gaming team. There's plenty of League of Legends teams and things like that. I don't know what game the kid plays, but there are plenty and so you can do it competitively and be going to college. What a perfect thing for a 19-year-old.
Someone wrote, how bad is Grand Theft Auto for a 16-year-old?
I find some of these games to be distasteful, but I hate to tell you this, I'm 66 years old, so I think I'm just old-fashioned when it comes to that. But I just find some of these games to be distasteful and desensitizing and sexist and all kinds of other things. The little bit that because I won't even watch. I'll watch videos of them. But in today's world, probably a 16-year-old is considered to be old enough to play that. I would not like my 10 or 12-year-old playing it for sure. But 16 years old, probably in today's world, most of this 16-year, I assume it's a male, most of his peers are playing. If they
someone just piped in that said Grand Theft Auto can be played in a gentle mode.
Okay.
So all right, another interesting question was, somebody did a fast, and while it was painful, it ended up being one of the more healthy things they've done as a family because they're engaged in the physical. And I think the secret to that is it's given you an opportunity to really engage in some other things. And again, as I learned from Gary and then applied in my own home, making sure that my kids could both, my daughter's a reader. I mean, my son plays games, my daughter reads voraciously, but both of them are, are in high school athletics. Both of them, have sports outside of. We do things as a family outside, and that really has been the difference maker. Let's see, we've got a family who wrote that we limit our 13-year-old son's video game and screen time, knowing he'll use the max. We also have a screen-free day once every other weekend. He follows the rules, but he resents us and complains we're treating him like a baby. We've done lots of education with him about brains, excessive video game time, but the resentment seems like something we just accept. Hard to do. What's the alternative to just, absorbing that resentment?
I would say hooray for them. That sounds like a pretty good plan, as long as he's able to do things with his friends, and one day a weekend, every other weekend sounds like a wonderful thing. I think I'd like to try that for myself. I wish I could kind of pull myself away from screens a little bit better than I do myself, and that's it's not recreation, it's work, but it's still the same kind of thing. I think someday that if the kid will kind of step back and look at that, and I wouldn't be surprised if some of his friends will say, "Huh," and start thinking about that, and start getting them to think about it. The other part I would say is that it's like it's a family value. This is our our family.
That's so true.
This is just kind of we value doing other things. We're letting you with screens. We're not. I mean, there are plenty of families where they really try to just totally hold back with that, but it doesn't sound like that's the case. I would. This is what I say.
It's so funny. Every time we'll go for a waterfall hike, or I'll find something fun to do as a family, and the kids just kvetch and complain. Why do we have to do this? and then we go, and then when we get back, they always say the same thing. Why don't we do this more often?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. Someone talked about, but if he loses a game, in particular Fortnite, his behavior becomes horrible. Well, that's what I call the digital monster. And what I did here was that when my son raged because losing, and he was screaming and yelling, then that was an automatic, everything shuts off, and he can rage all he wants to, but if it happens, he knows that not only is it going off, but then he's going to have to try and find a way to convince me that won't happen again before I will let him play again.
Yeah.
I was unwilling to tolerate those rage experiences that I was seeing happen as part of that digital monster.
Yeah. It's if you're in a basketball game and you scream at the referee and you get a technical foul, you're going to be in trouble. If you get a second technical, you're going to get kicked out of the game. It's what you're doing. You're basically saying you're getting kicked out of the game, and I think that kids need to learn those skills. Now, this is harder when we're talking about kids who have difficulties with emotional regulation. So when we're talking about kids with ADHD or kids who have learning issues or on the spectrum and things like that, those are far more difficult tasks for them to regulate their emotions. And I mean, the latest conceptualizations of ADHD is talks about the emotional regulation pieces being an important part. So we may have a different tolerance for that or a different limit for that. But nonetheless, it's a skill that's worth working on. And the fact is that the games and technology can be used as a really good tool for that. Now, if I can, let me just get off topic for 1 second. I also do not really recommend using opportunity to play video games as a reward. Okay. In other words, I don't think we should look at games and technology as dessert. I think that we should look at games and technology as being part of the diet, if you will. But that's not the only thing you have, and that that way of looking at it sort of takes something away from kind of an expectation in the world. And by the way, if kids aren't facile with digital media and technology, they're going to be struggling in this world. So the kids who are good at kind of getting onto Google and Google Meets and Google Classroom and all those kinds of things fared far better than their peers did who didn't know how to do that when it came to remote learning. And that stuff's not going away.
We have to teach our kids how to live in their world, not ours.
Yeah.
Another question from Yuki was, where can you get support if you are a single mom working a minimum 12-hour day? I'm interested in a retreat or anything like that. Well, we've got a family weekend, and at SOAR. Why don't you give us a call, and I'll see if I can. I'm available tomorrow, Yuki. If you want to reach out to me at SOAR, 828-456-3435, and I'll talk to you about some opportunities. And then someone else asked, how does SOAR Academy / our camps use technology? Well, at the Academy, technology is actually a fairly significant part of what we do. All of our math is done through a technological platform. We teach our kids how to do research, and they have opportunities to game in their free time. At summer camp, we're really less technology savvy. In fact, phones are left at home. We are investing in being present and outdoors. And so during the summertime, very little technology is utilized in our summer camp adventure programs. And then I think we tell our son, I know you hate it now, and someday you'll be glad that we love you so much. It would be much easier for you to have unlimited time. We do this because we love you, and it's our job to protect you and teach you balance. Balance, a little bit of everything is a good thing, but balance is absolutely necessary. My gamer just came home, and so all right. I think that is the end of our questions. I want to tell you, Randy, that again, I deeply appreciate every time I have a chance to interact with you. Your workshops and your play diet literally changed our lives in a significant way, and so I'm a huge advocate, and I just want to remind folks, where Randy's philosophy and mine comes so hand in hand is, get outside, do things as a family. Make sure that you're involving your kids in physical and just creating a total healthy experience. And every family is going to find their kind of their own sweet spot. Randy, thank you so much. All of you who stayed on to the end, we thank you, and we will post the full PowerPoint along with a rebroadcast of this webinar, and you'll be able to find that online. Share it with friends who might need or want to take a part of that. And if you're interested in learning more about Randy's program, his website is learningworksforkids.com. And if you're interested in learning more about our SOAR summer programs, we are enrolling now, and we'll be hosting summer programs in North Carolina, Florida, and Wyoming this summer. And we thank you. We appreciate you. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week. Bye, everybody.
Thank you, John.
No, thank you, Randy.
That was fun.